It was a Tuesday night when Colin Hartley stormed into St. Jude Medical Center, his designer shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights overhead made everything look colder, harsh, and that matched his mood exactly. He was there for one reason: to file a complaint, an investor in a local tech startup. Colin had recently poured millions into a new private health tech initiative, an urgent care model that was supposed to revolutionize patient wait times. But a colleague's daughter had just waited 3 hours in the ER at St. Jude, and Colin took it personally. He barely noticed the exhausted nurses at the front desk, didn't glance at the young mother trying to quiet her feverish toddler, just walked straight up and dropped his business card onto the counter. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge," he said, voice tight. "Now." The nurse blinked, startled by the sudden presence of someone so polished, so misplaced. "In the chaos of the ER, sir. We're in the middle of shift change." "If it's not an emergency, I am the emergency," Colin interrupted. "This hospital is part of my portfolio. I'm not here as a patient, I'm here as the person funding your next round of upgrades." There was a weight to his words. Money talked, even in rooms where pain screamed louder. As the head nurse stepped away to find someone higher up, Colin paced near the automatic doors, checking his phone, avoiding the wheezing cough of an elderly man nearby. He hated hospitals always. Had they reminded him of things he'd rather forget, of the past, of her. Just as he was about to follow up with another demand, a voice crackled over the PA system. "Code Blue, OR3, emergency surgery in progress." The doors to the OR corridor burst open as a gurney flew past. Colin instinctively stepped aside, but something about the figure on the stretcher caught his breath. Her hair, that same warm brown, shorter now, but unmistakable. The angle of her jaw beneath the oxygen mask, the scar just below her collarbone, one he remembered tracing with his fingertips years ago. "Wait." His voice cracked, but no one heard him. The gurney was swallowed by swinging double doors, and just like that, the complaint didn't matter anymore. Colin Hartley, venture capitalist, public speaker, business titan, stood frozen in the middle of a crowded ER, because he was almost certain his ex-wife was on that table, and she was fighting for her life. Before we continue, have you ever seen someone you once loved slip back into your life when you least expected it? Drop your thoughts below, and if this story already has you curious, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next changes everything. Colin didn't move for a long moment, not even when someone nudged him to get out of the hallway, not even when a nurse accidentally brushed his arm while hurrying past. He just stood there, still clutching his phone, still blinking as if trying to reprogram what he'd just seen. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be her. Evelyn. He hadn't said her name out loud in nearly 4 years, not since their divorce was finalized in a private mediation room uptown, where lawyers and silence did most of the talking. Not since she walked away, refusing alimony or any piece of his empire, just asking for one thing: distance. And now she was here, at this hospital, on that table. The Colin Hartley the public knew, the TED Talk Colin, the Forbes featured Colin, the man with a revolving door schedule and spotless suits, would have walked away. He had walked away from love, from her, but his feet moved on their own. He slipped past the front desk, through the corridor that said authorized personnel only. Nobody stopped him. His suit and confidence were his credentials. A younger nurse barely glanced at him as she answered a call, and Colin slid into the staff lounge just behind the OR. There was a glass window there, small and partially frosted, but through it he could see enough surgical lights, monitors blinking rapidly, a team of surgeons bent over a still body. Colin's breath caught in his throat. It was her. He could see the side of her face, pale and motionless. Her arm was bruised, forelines tangled with tape. Her chest rose and fell, only slightly, mechanically. He took a step closer. How did she end up here? Last he heard, Evelyn had taken a job with Doctors for Access, a non-profit that helped provide healthcare to underinsured women. She'd been moving between field clinics, refusing anything fancy, refusing to be tied down. She'd been the idealist. He'd been the builder. They admired each other, until they couldn't anymore, until their dreams took them in opposite directions. "Sir, you really shouldn't be here." The voice startled him. A nurse stood behind him, clipboard in hand. Colin turned slowly. "That woman, what happened to her?" "I can't disclose. She's my ex-wife," he said, the words tumbling out faster than he expected. Her name is Evelyn Hartley, or maybe Evelyn Tranagini. Don't know if she changed it back. The nurse blinked, her voice softened. Are you listed as family? No. A beat passed, a heavy one. I understand, Colin said, stepping back. But is she going to make it? The nurse hesitated, then looked down at her chart. She came in with internal bleeding, blunt force trauma from a car accident. Emergency. Surgery was the only option. She's lucky they got to her in time. Colin exhaled, his hands trembling. Blunt force trauma. His mind immediately filled in the blanks. An accident. Alone. Had she been driving late? Was she on one of her night shifts? Had anyone even called her family? Did she even have family anymore? They'd been each other's only family once. He found himself sitting in the hallway just outside the OR. As the nurse returned to her rounds, Colin Hartley, CEO, advisor. Deal closer was now just a man waiting on news from behind a sterile door. And as minutes stretched into an hour, and an hour felt like a lifetime, he realized something deeply uncomfortable. He had spent years trying to forget Evelyn, and now, watching the machines breathe for her, he was terrified of losing her all over again. Colin sat in the corridor for what felt like forever. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee, and every time the OR door swung open even, just a crack, his heart lurched. He kept checking his phone, not for emails, not for meetings, just hoping someone from the hospital would call, even though he was already here, even though he knew they wouldn't because he wasn't family anymore. At least, that's what he thought. Until a nurse came back, her eyes scanning the quiet corridor. Mr. Hartley. He stood up so quickly the chair screeched against the tile. Yes, I'm Colin Hartley. The nurse gave him a strange look, part surprise, part relief. You're listed as Ms. Tran's emergency contact. What? She glanced at her tablet. Evelyn listed you last year. We tried calling the number on file, but the system didn't connect. Colin looked down at his phone. Of course, he'd changed numbers after switching firms last fall. New team, new rules, new identity. He hadn't looked back, not even to update the people who once mattered. Is she? His voice cracked. Before he could finish the sentence, she's out of surgery, the nurse said gently. It was close, but she's stable for now. She's being moved to ICU for monitoring. The doctor will speak with you shortly. Colin closed his eyes, the weight of those words crashing down on him. Stable, alive. For a moment, that was enough. But then came the guilt. Why had she listed him? Why had she kept his name after everything? They hadn't spoken since signing the divorce papers. No calls, no letters, nothing but silence. Back then, it had felt necessary, clean, professional, a break between two people who wanted too much in different directions. But now, her choice to list him as the one to call in an emergency had unraveled something in him, something he thought he'd buried beneath PowerPoints and stock options. When the ICU nurse arrived to lead him to her room, Colin followed without a word. The walk was long and quiet. Too quiet. The hospital looked different now. Less like a place to complain about funding, and more like a place that held people's entire lives in the balance. Her room was dimly lit. The blinds drawn. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. She lay unconscious, her skin pale, her lips slightly parted. Tubes ran from her arms and nose. Her hair was matted to her forehead. Still, she looked like Evelyn. Older, maybe, tired, but still the woman who used to fall asleep reading patient charts. Still the woman who once stood on a podium beside him and told investors, medicine isn't a business, it's a responsibility. Colin sat beside her, unsure of what to do with his hands. Evelyn, he whispered, not expecting a response. It's me. The silence wrapped around him, as if the room itself were holding its breath. He glanced at her chart at the foot of the bed, notes scribbled in shorthand. Vitals, medications, plans for post-op imaging. A sticky note was taped to the side. Emergency contact, Colin Hartley. Mobile. Old number. He stared at it. She hadn't changed it, not when she had every reason to. The doctor entered quietly. Mr. Hartley. Colin stood. Yes, how is she? She was lucky, the doctor said, glancing at the monitors. We controlled the bleeding. No major organ damage, but she need rest. She may wake in the next 12 hours, maybe sooner. Colin nodded slowly. Can I stay? The doctor studied him for a moment, then said, yes, but don't expect much conversation tonight. her body's in recovery mode. As the doctor left, Colin sank back into the chair. Outside, the city moved on, horns honking, people texting, lights blinking in high-rises. But in here, time had collapsed. It was just the two of them like it used to be. Only now, she was unconscious, and he was wondering if she'd ever open her eyes again. And if she did, what she'd say. Would she want him there, or would she wish she'd written down someone else's name? Colin didn't sleep. He tried. He reclined in the visitor chair, shifted, even shut his eyes for a few minutes. But every sound from the machines monitoring Evelyn, every soft beep or sudden shift in rhythm snapped him back to attention. At 2:14 a.m. her hand twitched, a small movement, almost imperceptible. But Colin saw it. He leaned forward, his heart thudding in his chest. "Evelyn," he whispered, as if afraid his voice might pull her back into the dark instead of waking her. Another twitch. Then her eyelids fluttered, her breathing shifted, became slightly more conscious, less mechanical. The nurse had told him to press the call button when she stirred, but he couldn't move. Not yet. Not when she was so close to the surface. Her eyes opened, slowly and focused. Disoriented. "Evelyn," he said again, gently. "You're in the hospital. You're okay. You're safe." She blinked. Her gaze drifted toward the voice, her eyes, squinting through the dim lighting, her lips parted, dry and cracked. "Colin," she rasped. He felt the sound of his name hit like a blow and a bomb all at once. "I'm here," he said softly, taking her hand. It was cool but warm enough to still feel real, alive. "You're going to be okay. They fixed the bleeding. You're in ICU, but you're through the worst of it." She closed her eyes again, too weak to process everything, but then she whispered, barely audible, "Did anyone else get hurt?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The other car," she murmured. "Was anyone else in the crash?" Colin hadn't thought to ask. Shame flooded his chest. "I'll find out," he promised, "but you need to rest. You're okay now. That's what matters." She nodded faintly, her breath already evening out again. Just seconds of awareness, then sleep reclaimed her. Still, it was enough to make his chest ache, even now. Evelyn's first instinct was to worry about others, even half-conscious. She was asking about someone else's safety. That was Evelyn. Always. Had been. The woman who stopped mid-conference call to answer an intern's anxious question. The woman who gave up her seat on the hospital board because she didn't want her name used in PR campaigns. The woman who once stayed up all night to comfort a patient's family. Even though she had food poisoning, he stared at her sleeping face and felt something tighten behind his ribs. He remembered the last fight they had. It had been about time, about the absence of it, about how he was always in meetings, always on planes, always 5 minutes from done but never really there. And she had tried to hold on, tried until she couldn't anymore. "I can't keep reaching for someone who's never standing still," she'd told him. "I need something rooted, something real." And he had nodded like he understood, but inside he hadn't. He hadn't understood what she meant until he was left alone, surrounded by accolades and achievements, but no one to call at 2 a.m. And now, here she was again, after all this time, and she'd still written his name down. That wasn't love, not necessarily. It might have just been habit, or hope, or maybe the strange tether that remains between two people who once dreamed together. The nurse came in quietly to check her and vitals. She woke up. Colin whispered, "Just for a moment." She said my name. The nurse smiled. "That's a good sign." She asked about the other car, about the people in it. "Only minor injuries," the nurse said. "A teenage driver, shaken but not harmed. It could have been worse. Your Evelyn, she took the brunt of the hit." Colin nodded, silent. That sounded like her too. Taking the hit so someone else wouldn't have to. As the nurse left, Colin leaned forward again. He looked at Evelyn. And in that quiet moment, he realized something painful and clear. He hadn't come to the ER that night just to complain about hospital performance. He'd come to protect an idea of control, of efficiency, of what healthcare should look like from a boardroom window. But now, sitting here, holding the hand of a woman who once loved him deeply and might never again, he was finally beginning to understand what it meant to care for something more than margins. By morning, Evelyn had drifted in and out of sleep several times, each one lasting longer than the last. But each time she opened her eyes, Colin was still there, just she didn't say much, just the occasional murmur, a question about what day it was, whether the nurse's name was Julia or Marie, whether Colin had eaten anything, which of course he hadn't. The strange thing was, she never asked why he was there, not once. It was as if his presence, improbable as it was, didn't surprise her, as if, somehow, she'd always expected this moment, or maybe hoped for it by noon. Her voice had regained enough strength to string sentences together. "You don't have to stay," she said softly, her eyes on the window. "I'm not your responsibility." Colin took a breath. "I know I don't have to. I want to." She looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes hadn't changed, still sharp, still warm, still able to make him feel like the only person in the room, and the smallest person in the room at the same time. "That's new," she said with a half smile. "The wanting." He let out a short, embarrassed laugh. "Yeah, it's been a year of new things. You're still in suits," she teased. "You're still in hospitals." He shot back gently. She shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement tugged at her healing side. "They're still understaffed and overworked. Not much has changed." Colin looked at her for a long moment. "So why me?" he asked finally. "Why keep my name on your file?" Evelyn's expression turned quiet. She didn't answer immediately. She traced a fingertip along the edge of the blanket. "Because," she said finally, "even when you were gone, I didn't stop believing you'd show up when it really mattered." Colin's chest tightened. He didn't deserve that kind of grace, but she'd given it anyway. "I never stopped caring about you, Evelyn," he said, voice low. "I just didn't know how to show it without ruining everything you stood for." She turned toward him. "And what do you think I stood for, Colin?" He looked down, his voice thick. "Integrity, purpose, selflessness. Things I wasn't." She was quiet again. The machines filled the space between them. "I never wanted you to be me," she whispered. "I just wanted you to see me, to meet me halfway." Colin nodded slowly. "I didn't," he admitted. "Not then. I was too busy climbing, and now," he hesitated, then reached into the pocket of his blazer and pulled out his phone. He scrolled, found a photo, one he hadn't looked at in a while. It was from 3 years ago, the last vacation they took before it all fell apart. Evelyn standing barefoot on a dock, holding a stethoscope in one hand and a mango smoothie in the other, grinning like she had the whole world figured out. "I still have this," he said. "I still remember that laugh." She smiled faintly. "That smoothie was terrible." They both laughed softly. It didn't change the past, but it made the present more bearable. "I don't know what this is," Colin said after a moment. "I'm not here to force anything, but if there's even a sliver of space in your life, I'd like to earn my way back into it, as whatever you'll allow me to be." Evelyn closed her eyes for a beat, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. "We'll see," she said. "First, I need to figure out how to sit up without screaming." Colin chuckled. "Deal?" He stayed all afternoon. He helped the nurse adjust her pillows, held a straw to her lips so she could sip water, answered her questions about the world outside, what was new in politics, who won the NBA finals, whether his hair had really gone grey at the temples or if it was just bad lighting. And later, as she drifted into a more peaceful sleep than before, Colin stepped out into the hallway. He made a call, not to a client, not to his office, but to the HR director of the health tech firm he'd been funding. "We're doing things differently," he said. "No more shortcuts. No more PR wins that don't help real patients. I want someone like Evelyn to walk into one of our clinics and say, 'This feels right.' If we can't do that, I'm out." It was the first real decision he'd made in months, a decision that felt like something she might have made. "Before we move on, have you ever wished you could go back and say the thing you never said before it was too late? Share your thoughts below. And if this story is stirring something in you, consider subscribing, because the healing is only just beginning. Evelyn's recovery was slow, but steady. By day 3, she could sit upright for more than a few minutes without pain. By day 5, she'd started asking for her own lab results, double-checking her for fluid schedule, and correcting a nurse's charting error with the same calm assertiveness she once used in budget meetings. "She's back," Colin had joked, when she started pointing out inefficient, nurse-patient workflows. But what lingered underneath her sharpness was something new, something heavier, and Colin noticed. She wasn't quite herself, at least, not the self he remembered. There was a pause between her sentences, a distance in her eyes when she looked out the window too long. Her wit was intact, but the warmth beneath it flickered more than it burned. On the 6th night, After dinner had been cleared and the hospital quieted, Evelyn finally spoke the thing she hadn't said. "I wasn't supposed to be in the city that night," she said quietly. Colin looked up from the chair by her bed, where he'd been reading an email he hadn't planned to send. "I had booked a flight," she continued, "out to Albuquerque. There's a community clinic I've been helping launch. They were opening a new women's center." "What happened?" She looked down at her hands, fingers playing with the edge of the blanket. "I cancelled the flight," she said, "at the last minute." "Why?" There was a long silence. Then she answered, without looking at him, "Because I saw your name." Colin felt something in him still. "What do you mean?" "I saw an email about your visit. You were coming to tour St. Jude," she said, voice quiet but steady. "I knew it wasn't official. I wasn't even on duty that night. But I don't know. Something told me to stay, to be nearby." Colin leaned forward, his breath caught. "You stayed because of me." "I guess I wanted to see you," she said, "even if it was just from a distance. Just to know you were real, that all of it had actually happened, that we weren't just a blur in each other's memory." He blinked, stunned. "You could have emailed, called, so could you. Fair, honest." She turned her head and met his eyes. "We were always waiting for the other person to go first." He swallowed. "I would have gone first if I'd known." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we needed the crash." He winced. "I wouldn't have chosen this." "No," she agreed. "But I've had a lot of time to think, lying here, and I realized something." Colin sat up straighter. "You always thought I left because I didn't believe in your ambition," she said. "But that was never the problem." "Then what was it?" "You believed in your mission more than you believed in us." The words stung. "Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I don't want to punish you for that," she added. "I just want you to know the difference now, if we ever try again." Colin didn't respond right away. He looked at her, looked, even pale and bruised. She held herself with a quiet dignity. The same Evelyn who'd once stood up to a senator in a public health hearing because she refused to let children's medication become a political pawn. "I do know the difference now," he said finally. She tilted her head. "Work matters, but people matter more," he continued. "Impact isn't about innovation or IPOs, it's about how someone feels when they walk into a clinic, or when they're scared and broken in a hospital bed and someone shows up. It's about staying, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's easier to walk away." Evelyn blinked slowly. "You sound different." "I am." She didn't say anything, but her hand slid toward his on the bed, resting just close enough to touch. He placed his hand over hers, gently. They didn't need to define it. Not yet, but something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of pain shared, of time lost, and of something maybe not gone entirely. That night, after she fell asleep, Colin stayed by her side again, and for the first time since that door had opened days ago, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something to go wrong. He felt like he was home. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Evelyn's ICU room, casting soft streaks across the white sheets. The machines had grown quieter, now fewer alerts, fewer wires. She could sit up on her own. She was even asking for books, stubbornly refusing the hospital's flimsy paperbacks in favor of something with spine and soul. Colin had stayed. Every night since the surgery, he'd cancelled meetings, postponed a keynote. His assistant had sent confused texts at first, then stopped asking questions altogether. Maybe they assumed he was sick, or grieving. In a way, he was doing both. Grieving the time lost, healing from the version of himself he'd pretended to be. By day 9, Evelyn had begun to regain her natural rhythm. She asked about global health policies, recited patient stories from memory, joked with the nurses like she belonged there, which, in many ways, she always had. But that morning, something was different. Her tone was quieter. Her gaze lingered too long on the flowers by the window. When Colin brought her fresh coffee from the cafe downstairs, a real cappuccino, not the hospital sludge, she only smiled faintly. "What is it?" he asked, settling beside her bed. She hesitated, then she looked at him with that same calm, clear-eyed certainty he remembered from their hardest conversations. "Colin, I need you to go." He blinked. "Go where?" "Home," she said. "Out, away, somewhere that isn't this room." He sat back, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "It's not that. You've been more than I ever expected, but I need space." He nodded slowly, trying to understand. "Evelyn, I don't mind being here. I want to be here. You don't have to go through this alone. I know, and I'm grateful, she said gently. But I can't start healing if I'm being watched like glass. Colin looked down at his hands. Her words didn't sting in a cruel way. They were honest, compassionate, but still he felt the ache of being gently pushed away just when he'd begun to feel close again. Evelyn, he started, but she cut in softly. I have to learn how to stand again, without leaning on what used to hold me up. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. Is this goodbye? He asked. No, she said, her voice steady. It's an intermission. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For how long? I don't know, she said, until I'm strong enough to decide what I want. Not just in theory. In reality. Colin nodded, slowly, respectfully. Okay. She reached for his hand one last time. I know it's unfair, she whispered. You showed up when I least expected it. You stayed, and now I'm asking you to walk away. He gave her a soft smile. Maybe you're not asking me to walk away. Maybe you're trusting I'll know how to come back. That made her eyes glisten. He stood, reluctantly, and leaned over to kiss her gentle, reverent. I'll be close, he said. No, she replied, and that makes all the difference. He left the hospital without looking back, not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood that caring sometimes means letting go. Outside, the world buzzed with its usual indifference. Cars honked. Pedestrians scrolled their phones. Someone nearby was arguing over a parking ticket. But inside Colin, something had changed. He didn't feel like the man who'd walked into that to deliver a complaint. He felt like the man who had finally learned how to listen. That night, he checked into a small hotel near the edge of the city. Not his usual suite at the Ritz or corner penthouse downtown. Just a quiet, clean place where he could think. He sat by the window, staring at a city skyline that had once felt like his empire. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like building anything. He felt like becoming something instead, something better. When Evelyn finally opened her eyes again, it was late morning. A soft light filtered through the hospital window, illuminating the room in a way that felt almost too gentle for a place built to withstand trauma. Her head was heavy, her body aching, but her mind was clearer than it had been in months. At first, she didn't speak. She just turned her head slightly and saw Colin dozing in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted back, arms crossed, the same way he used to fall asleep during their long road trips in another lifetime. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the chair, and the sleeves of his dress shirt were rolled up. His face looked older, more worn, but there was peace there, a kind of surrender. A nurse walked in quietly, checking vitals, and Evelyn gave a slight nod. The nurse smiled warmly. He hasn't left since last night, not even to eat. Evelyn's throat was too dry to answer. The nurse offered her a sip of water and a reassuring squeeze of her hand before slipping out. Moments later, Colin stirred. She watched him wake up, how his eyes adjusted, blinking as if reality had to reassert itself. When he saw her looking at him, he sat up instantly, his eyes wide. Evelyn, he breathed. You're awake. She nodded slowly, her voice rasped out, hoarse. Looks like you got your miracle after all. Colin let out a sound half laugh, half sob, and reached for her hand. You scared the hell out of me. You always were dramatic, she murmured. With the faintest smirk, there was a long pause. 100 unspoken words passed between them in silence. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Finally, Evelyn blinked. For what? For everything I didn't say. For leaving the way I did. For building walls and pretending they were fences. She looked at him, tears rising. I was angry for a long time. You had every right. But I wasn't just angry because you left, she whispered. I was angry because I never stopped loving you. And I hated that you didn't fight for us. Colin bowed his head. I didn't think I deserved you. Another silence. But this one was different, softer. Healing. Maybe you didn't, she said gently. But you came back. That has to mean something. He nodded, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. I'll be here, however long you'll let me. Evelyn stared at the ceiling for a while before answering. We don't have forever. Colin, he looked at her, heart clenching. But, she continued, we might still have enough. Later that day, Emily visited again, flowers in hand, and an awkward hope in her smile. Colin gave them space, stepping outside the room for the first time in hours. As he waited, he called his assistant and postponed every meeting for the rest of the week. There were no boardrooms more important than the room he had just left. When Emily came out, her eyes were rimmed with tears, but she smiled at Colin. "She's strong. She always was." "Is it weird?" Emily asked softly. "All of this?" He shook his head. "It's not weird. It's what should have happened years ago." Emily hugged him unexpectedly. "Thank you for showing up. Not everyone does." As the days passed, Evelyn's strength returned little by little. The surgery had gone well, and while the road ahead would be long, the prognosis was better than anyone had expected. Every morning, Colin was there. Sometimes he read aloud from the paper, sometimes they just sat quietly. Occasionally, they reminisced about old vacations, burnt dinners, the way she used to sing while brushing her teeth. And one evening, just before sunset, she said something that stopped Colin cold. "I don't want to die angry. Colin, if there's one gift this moment has given Mitz clarity. Life's too short to carry what doesn't heal us." Colin reached for her hand again, holding it tight. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "Not this time." They didn't talk about what came next in concrete terms. There were too many unknowns, but for the first time in years, they weren't running from each other or themselves. They were simply there, together, and sometimes that was more than enough. Colin stood frozen outside the ICU, his eyes locked on the frosted glass. Beyond it, Evelyn lay still, surrounded by wires, tubes, and the soft hum of blinking machines. She'd just come out of a 6-hour emergency surgery. The doctors hadn't made any promises, but they'd done everything they could. He didn't know how long he'd been standing there. Time felt suspended. Sounds were distant, emotions dulled. Everything narrowed into a single point of silence that sat heavy in his chest. Colin had never been the kind of man who believed in fate, but tonight, as he stared at the woman who once held his entire heart, lying still and pale under the fluorescent lights, he couldn't help but wonder, was he meant to walk into that at that exact moment? Because if he'd been just 10 minutes later, he might never have seen her again. The ICU door opened quietly. Dr. Hargrove stepped out, his face drawn with fatigue. He gave Colin a small nod before speaking in a low, steady voice. "She made it through the surgery, but she's still very weak. The next few hours are critical. If there's anything you need to say to her, don't wait too long." Colin nodded, his throat tight. He stepped into the room. The smell of antiseptic hit him first, then the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Evelyn looked almost peaceful, fragile, but still unmistakably her. The woman he'd once loved so deeply and never truly stopped loving. He pulled up a chair beside her bed and gently reached for her hand, his first time touching her in over 7 years. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice barely holding steady. "I don't even know where to begin." He paused, studying the way her fingers lay motionless in his. So many things had been left unsaid. Too many. "I was angry, so angry, at the world, at myself, and I blamed you because it was easier than facing the pain." He looked up at her face, searching for even the slightest flicker of recognition. "Nothing. But the truth is, you didn't leave me. I left you. I left when things got too real, when grief got too heavy, and you carried it all." A tear slipped down his cheek as his voice cracked. "I didn't know how to stay. And you, God, Evelyn, you deserved someone who did." He took a shaky breath, then leaned closer. "If you wake up, if you give me a second chance to fix even a piece of this mess, I swear I won't waste it." And for the first time in years, Colin didn't feel like a CEO, or a man with control, or even a man with answers. He just felt human. The next morning, Colin stood beside Evelyn's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the thin blanket. Machines still hummed beside her, but the beeping of the monitors had settled into a more comforting rhythm. He hadn't slept much, only stepped out once to call Lily, who was now on a flight back with his sister. And yet, Colin felt strangely calm, perhaps for the first time in years. Not the kind of calm that comes from answers, but the kind that comes from surrender. Evelyn stirred. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, brows twitching like she was unsure whether the moment was real or another dream. Colin moved closer, barely breathing. "Hey," she whispered hoarsely, her voice more air than sound. "I'm here," he said gently, taking her hand in his. She looked around, then down at her hand in his. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. "What happened?" "You collapsed. They rushed you into surgery. It was close. But you made it," he said, voice low, steady. Dr. Yamada says you're still not out of the woods completely, but you're here. You're okay. Evelyn blinked slowly. Her eyes glistened. I didn't think you'd still care. I never stopped caring, he said without hesitation. I just forgot how to show it. A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just heavy with all the words left unsaid for too long. I was angry, she whispered. Not at you, exactly, but at how it all ended. I know, Colin nodded. I was angry too, at everything, but it wasn't your fault, and it wasn't fair to leave like I did. You didn't just leave me, Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. You left yourself. Colin's throat tightened. You're right. They sat there quietly, fingers still entwined, as the sun began to filter in through the half-drawn blinds. Somewhere outside the room, nurses walked briskly, phones rang, and a code was called over the intercom. But in here, time slowed. I saw Lily, Evelyn said suddenly. Colin looked startled. You did? After I passed out? I don't know. Maybe it was a dream. She was sitting in that old yellow armchair, eating gummy bears. Told me to stop being so dramatic. Evelyn gave a breathy laugh. Colin smiled faintly, eyes moist. That sounds like her. She said you were trying, and that I should forgive you. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of her words wrapped around his chest like a quiet redemption. I don't know what happens next, Evelyn said softly. But, if you're willing, maybe we can figure it out, together. Colin gently brought her hand to his lips. There's nothing I want more. Weeks passed. Evelyn recovered slowly but steadily. Colin never left her side, not this time. When Lily returned, she ran straight into her mother's arms, and Evelyn cried for the first time in a long time, not from pain, but from overwhelming, inexplicable grace. Colin began working remotely, restructuring his priorities piece by piece. He even started therapy again, this time without defensiveness or walls. Dr. Chen welcomed him back like no time had passed, but they both knew he wasn't the same man who walked out months ago. One afternoon, he brought Evelyn and Lily to the same bench where they'd taken family photos years ago. They sat quietly, watching a street performer juggle flaming torches. Lily clapped and laughed with abandon. Evelyn leaned against Colin's shoulder. Do you ever wish we could go back? She asked. Sometimes, he admitted. But maybe what we're building now is better, because it's real, honest. Evelyn nodded. Maybe broken things, when put back together right, are stronger than they were before. Colin looked at her and smiled. Like us. Before we end, have you ever tried to rebuild something that once fell apart only to find it became something even more beautiful? Let me know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting for you here.